Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I'm Catherine Brobeck.
And I'm Kemper Donovan.
And this episode is really special to us because guess what? We've been doing this for a year. That seems insane.
Shocking.
Yeah, but we've been doing this for a year. And so what we wanted to do was to talk about a few things. One of which was that intro part about reading and ranking. Because we took a while to get into the swing of things, I think. You'll agree, Kemper.
With the rankings, yes. I mean, the rankings was always the more, I think, fanciful part of our Agatha Christie project. Because the idea of, and whenever we would discuss it with anyone, I would always feel the need to make this disclaimer of, obviously, ranking something as subjective as the experience of reading a bunch of books by one author is a ridiculous sort of a project, but if done the way we hoped, it will lead to further fruitful conversation about said books. Not that we think we're providing ironclad answers as to which book is better than others. And I think that is true. I think the rankings portion of our episodes, I think it's there that we get at the heart of what works and what doesn't and why and how. Yeah. So I'm glad that we're doing it, but it was a little wonky.
Well, it still is, and it will still be going forward.
Yeah. It's relative, right? Like ranking is a relative thing, so it was hard to get our bearings until I think we had a few under our belt, which, as you are also mentioning, is not like it's not that it's a perfect system and we're not going to make mistakes in the future. I'm sure we will continue to make mistakes left and right, but I think especially in the beginning, it was difficult to get a sense of what was appropriate in these 1 through 10 rankings for these different categories.
Correct. But so we want to talk about those rankings and talk about is it 14 novels that we've actually covered?
So I guess about approximately a fifth of the canon, of the oeuvre.
Of the oeuvre, but also like a billion short stories and adaptations. So we've done that. And what else are we going to cover?
And then I think we just want to talk a little more broadly and qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively about our feelings and thoughts on the podcast thus far. I think what we didn't appreciate when we embarked on this project was how significant the act of rereading as opposed to the act of reading was going to be. And it seems obvious now that of course it would be, but in many cases we're rereading books that we haven't read for decades.
Right.
And it's been interesting.
It's a very different experience reading something when you're in your 30s than when you were, 11 years old.
11 or 12.
Yeah.
Yeah. The type of reader that you are changes just even from a reading comprehension viewpoint, but certainly also from a where you are in your life and what stories mean to you and how you interact with them sort of perspective as well. So we will get into all of that, but let's tackle these rankings. And I'm going to provide on our various social media platforms, so on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, a snapshot of our rankings when this episode drops. So if you should so desire, I have a feeling this conversation will be a lot more interesting and comprehensible if you're actually looking at that ranking spreadsheet. But we have 14 books, as we mentioned, that we've read thus far. Our ranking system, just to go over that, we have 6 categories. The first 5 have number values anywhere from 1 to 10 that we assign to them, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, which means that there's a grand total of 50 points that any one novel could get to have a perfect score. The final category is where we deduct for what we've called stuck in its time, which is something that we just have to deal with when we're reading Agatha Christie in the 21st century. It's been nearly 100 years since The Mysterious Affair at Styles, so there are certainly issues with reading these novels as a modern reader of this time. So a perfect score would have 50 points and 0 deductions for a grand total of 50. Nothing has reached that point yet. Our highest scoring novel is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which did get a rare 10 out of 10 in plot mechanics, and I think we certainly will not be messing with that.
No.
I think that is fair, because the plot mechanics of Murder of Roger Ackroyd are ingenious. That book scored quite high, got an 8 in plot credibility, got a 6 in detective characterization, and just high scores all around, also for one-off characters and setting and tone, and no deductions. So that's why that is our number one book, and I think that's pretty fair. That is, one of the quote-unquote Christie crown jewels.
One of the interesting things that I noticed when looking at this is if it hadn't been for the deductions, Peril at End House would have outranked Murder of Roger Ackroyd by our count.
Yeah. Let's talk about our top 3 thus far, which are Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Okay, you know what? Let's talk about our first 5, because I think the 5th one is going to be an interesting point to bring up, and number 4 is also important.
Okay, so here are our top 5 in ascending order. Number 5 is The Man in the Brown Suit, which is a little surprising. Number 4 is The Murder at the Vicarage, so that would be first Miss Marple novel. Number 3 is Peril at End House, a Poirot novel. Number 2 is Murder on the Orient Express, also Poirot, of course, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd at number 1, likewise a Poirot. Number 2 and number 1 are not all that surprising or controversial in any way. Those are often pointed to as 2 of Christie's greatest novels, and we agree. So I think we feel good about where they are in the rankings. But yeah, let's talk about Peril at End House at number 3, because what Catherine says is very true. We had to take away 4 deductions for Peril at End House because there was a whole lot of anti-Semitism and some other funky stuff going on in that book. But if we hadn't deducted, that would have gotten 39, which would have put it in number 1.
Right. And and then somehow after rereading it, that wouldn't have been surprising. I think it's a better book.
I think it's a better book, too. I will be honest with you. I think that you, Catherine, are even as high as I am also on Peril at End House. I think you are even higher. I am perhaps a little inclined to adjust this one down a little bit, but I'm not necessarily wedded to that. I think it should be high up there. It is, to me, a little alarming that, but not for the Stuck in Its Time deductions, it would be beating The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. That's a little much.
I think it's more modern than a lot of the other books that we've read, and that is something that I felt struck by. And it's also
all that cocaine.
Yeah, it's all that cocaine. But no, it's unrepentantly cruel.
Why did we give it a 9 in detective characterization and we only gave Murder on the Orient Express and Murder of Roger Ackroyd 6s? Is Poirot really that much better in Peril at End House? Poirot and Hastings?
He's not good in Murder on the Orient Express. That's one of the things that we talked about. He doesn't have a lot to do. So I feel very confident in leaving it.
I feel like the 6 for Poirot and Murder of Roger Ackroyd is not totally fair. I think it's absolutely fair for Murder on the Orient Express. That was one of our major takeaways, that I was surprised by how bad Poirot is as a character.
Well, you're right.
Just not really,
he's somebody,
springing off the page.
He's a functionary in it. Less than a character.
Rather than lowering Peril at End House, which I agree. I think it has such high scores, 7, 8, 9, 7, 8. I think the answer is more that The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is at 37, by the way. It's not like it's in any way nearly perfect. We only gave it a 6 for setting and tone. We only gave it a 7 for one-off characters, which are totally fair in those cases. But I feel like that should at least be a 7, if not an 8.
I would be okay moving it to a 7. I still think that that's actually one where we were pretty accurate. I don't think he is as much of a character as you might remember in the back of your mind. And I think that the ones in which Poirot is the best character are, at least at this point, the ones narrated by Captain Hastings.
No, I think that's fair. Let's take it up then. Let's take it up to a 7, which still doesn't mean, by the way, that with the deductions, Peril at End House would still beat it, but that makes me feel a little bit better. And then Murder at the Vicarage, I think, is absolutely fair that is in 4th place, because
Murder at the Vicarage is a delight to read. So
it's a delight, and it's a beloved Christie novel, too. I mean, it's certainly not one that non-Christie fans can name off the top of their head, but anyone who's read even a little Christie generally has read The Murder at the Vicarage and loves The Murder at the Vicarage.
Oh,
it's delightful.
Yeah, it is completely delightful, and I am very happy.
Speaking of narrators other than Hastings, the vicar is,
correct.
I love him.
Well, no, I mean, it's really funny. We don't have any of Captain Hastings here. That seems really...
That's true.
Seems really weird, given what I just said, that's the best characterization of Poirot.
We'll get to that in a second, and I think we'll be raising some of the Hastings narrated novels in just a moment. But let's talk about The Man in the Brown Suit, because this one, we talked and joke a lot in the podcast about how much we love this novel, and that's not changing. I do love this novel. I love Anne Bedingfeld. It's been a while since we've name-checked her.
Really accidentally high.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, the only other perfect 10 we ever gave any category was The Man in the Brown Suit for setting and tone, which is a little ridiculous.
You know what I would say? It's still the one that has the most interesting detail about setting.
Absolutely, but you know what? There is a novel that I suspect that is coming that is going to get a 10 out of 10 for setting and tone.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Possibly know what I'm talking about.
I might know what you're talking about.
The Man in the Brown Suit ain't no, and then there were none.
No.
So let's give it a 9. I mean, it is a really good setting and tone, but it's not a 10 out of 10.
It might also deserve, if you really think about it, we gave it actually a really high number of deductions, but it could probably even deserve more.
It's funny, we gave The Secret of Chimneys 6 deductions because we had, starting out, we were like, okay, we'll only deduct 1 through 5, but that was a little arbitrary anyway. I don't even know why we don't have 10 deductions as a possible maximum. Like, there's no reason to not deduct more. I totally agree with that, and I honestly think it deserves at least 6, if not 7.
I mean, basically, there's
way xenophobic and racist.
Super xenophobic, and also, if you think about how it ends up with a me Tarzan, you Jane ending.
The gender relations in that book and the sex politics are deeply problematic. Let's give it 7 deductions.
Problematic. Although, I will say this much: she does make the choice for herself. And, it actually seems somewhat more liberated than if she were to have to be prissy and, have to be somebody's conservative mother in London. Instead, she gets to be, naked in the jungle.
I still stand by my author biographical analysis on that one, which I know is a slightly annoying thing to do. A lot of people frown on looking at the author's life when you're trying to interpret a novel, but just given what she was going through with the Archie business, to me that ending is one of desperation. And it's really depressing.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel liberated. To me,
if you look at it,
but that's extra textual,
right? If you look at it from an extra textual perspective, it's really depressing. Right. But if you look at it from a narrative perspective, I don't know.
Yeah. Here's the other thing that I think was a little high: plot mechanics. I mean, yes, it's a good for one of her breezy thrillers. It's probably the best in plot mechanics. But let's take a look at what the plot mechanics scores for her breezy thrillers have been: 2, 4, 4, 4. And this one we gave a 7, which I mean I think at least a 6 is more in line.
No, I would definitely feel okay with dropping that.
Yeah, there's nothing ingenious about it. It's just that it works. I mean it works in its linear plotting. So that's taking it down a bit, and I think we just need
we should never forget that there is a villainous letter series at the end.
But I would argue that letter actually works in the book.
Oh, no, I think it does too, but it is such a contrivance that...
Right. That's true. And it was a precursor to Ackroyd, which I think I got so excited about that maybe I was more judging it by oh, wow, she was just about to do that amazingly well in Ackroyd, and it's not it's done.
Right. Right.
And actually, for that reason, also, I don't know do the characters really deserve an 8, the one-off characters? They're really good, but that's the highest out of any book right now for one-off characters. That seems a little absurd. That the characters in The Man in the Brown Suit were better than in Peril at End House. I mean, I'm okay with putting it at a 7. I don't think it needs to go way down, but that just seems super high.
Anne is...
Well, Anne is delightful, as we have said, but is she
a better character than Nick?
Again, given that The Man in the Brown Suit, it's the best of the thrillers, but it's still a thriller.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess we can lower it. I think Anne is like a spunkier, more fun, enjoyable character than somebody like Nick, who, as I said, why I think that Peril at End House deserves to be ranked that high is because I think that Nick is truly terrifying.
Yeah. Oh no. Agreed. And a character can only be terrifying if they're actually convincingly drawn or interestingly drawn in some way. So absolutely. Let's kind of just go through now our middle 5 here and see how we feel, and then we can kind of see how things shake out at the end. Our next 5 are in ascending order. Why Didn't They Ask Evans, which we just covered last week. The Murder on the Links, Lord Edgeworth Dies, The Secret Adversary, and The Mystery of the Blue Train.
The Mystery on the Blue Train is bad. So
yeah, The Mystery of the Blue Train is bad. Agatha Christie agrees. It was basically her least favorite book.
Why it got ranked so high by us, I don't really know. Also because it's the one that we make fun of the most.
Yeah. First of all, why did we give it an 8 out of 10 for setting and tone? That is incorrect. That's incorrect.
It's because it has really good descriptions of the seaside resort in the south of France or wherever. No, they're not even in the south of France.
Good. I'd take that down to a 5.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. All right. Everything else is a little, I mean, The Mystery of the Blue Train got a 6 for plot mechanics. That seems like maybe that's I feel that feels like a 5 to me also.
There is a ghost in it. I just want to be real clear about that.
Seriously, we always mention this, but this is thus far the only novel in which an actual supernatural act occurs. Yeah. We're giving that a 5. That takes it down another point. Plot credibility is a 5. Detective characterization is a 5. One-off characters are a 6. I guess that's all okay. Honestly, I'm almost inclined to just give it 5s all around. I don't even know if I guess we liked Catherine Gray, and we do mention her a lot.
Yeah.
That's fine. Let's leave it at that. Then The Secret Adversary, I mean, I'll be honest, I think that Tommy and Tuppence, they're such an interesting little niche within the Christie-verse because they straddle, at least in The Secret Adversary, the thriller Christie and the mystery puzzle Christie, and then based on where they go, they kind of continue to straddle that. Although the middle Tommy and Tuppence's, I think, are more squarely mysteries, quite honestly. But she draws them well, and The Secret Adversary works. So, I mean, in a weird way, I guess we could argue if you're going to count The Secret Adversary as a thriller, that truly is the best thriller, even better than The Man in the Brown Suit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's a Tommy and Tuppence, and so you are reading it in that context, but yeah, of course it's better, and they're delightful, and they're young, and they seem vibrant, and as a book, it's hopeful in a weird way.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this was her second book. I mean, she wrote it and she was still young, and she was, she had a young child, and you can feel that exhilaration of just after World War I, where, yes, there was a lot of pain, but it was, we're out and we're alive, and we're in London and everything is exciting, and I still really remember that. I mean, funnily enough, as things stand now, we actually have this in a tie with The Man in the Brown Suit, which I'm totally okay with because I would give The Secret Adversary the edge in that tie. And having them tie in terms of rankings is much more, I think, in line with how I feel about those two than having The Man in the Brown Suit be 8 points higher.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the thing about both of them, and this is one of the things that makes me actually really sad if you're talking about extra textual things. They're both hopeful, right? And in a way that I don't think a lot of the other books are. And if we're talking about Peril at End House, or for that matter, Murder on the Orient Express, there is something so toxic about the idea of humanity.
Yeah. And part of that maybe is just plain old maturity, it's just being an older person and living in the world. But it also probably is her personal experience, and it's also the time that she's living in. Well,
right, and so if you look at Peril at End House was, 5 books or whatever later, and you have the bright young things that were Tommy and Tuppence and that were Anne. And then you turn it and you end up with Nick.
Nick and her cocaine-addled friends, one of whom is a murderer and the other of whom is essentially an abused wife whose husband tries to kill her at the end of the book. And she's the one that gets the happy ending. They're a troubled bunch of people.
They are. And I mean, it's not really a happy ending. You have to assume that the damage done is so bad that it's not going to be like Tommy and Tuppence being like, oh, well, hey, we had this terrible thing happen to us, but like, we just love adventure and fun. And like,
right.
we will be okay about it.
I just got knocked on the head 8 times in the course of this story, but I'm good. I'm good to go.
Right. And then in Murder on the Orient Express, I mean, none of those people are ever going to be okay.
Right. There's not even lip service paid to that.
No.
In that book.
It's just assumed that the damage done is so bad.
But I do think that speaks to the power of both of those books. The one that feels a little out of whack to me is Lord Edgware Dies. I think it's a little low, but I think I like Lord Edgware Dies more than you.
Yeah, I think you do too.
You really think Lord Edgware Dies is not as good? You think The Secret Adversary is better than Lord Edgware Dies? Really?
No, I don't.
Here's where I think we were a little low.
Although you know what, I like The Secret Adversary more than I like Lord Edgware Dies.
Sure. I mean, I hate Hemingway, but I appreciate the fact that Hemingway is a fine author.
Interesting analogy, but okay.
I think we were low in plot mechanics for Lord Edgware Dies. I think a 6 is
well, my point stands, and I made the same point about why didn't they ask Evans, which is, who done it.
Yes, and then we talked about this in Why Didn't They Ask Evans, why it is okay in Lord Edgware Dies, because you don't know how, and the how is extremely interesting and ingenious and unexpected and awesome in the Christie way that you come to expect.
Right.
Why Didn't They Ask Evans, it's not. It's terrible, which is part of why that book is so terrible. But that's why I think it's not. I don't think it's fair to critique it in the same way, even though it's true. They are both technically boomerang clues, right? Mm-hmm. But I think Lord Edgware Dies deserves at least a 7, if not an 8.
I think that we could boost it to an 8. Okay. I mean, I will say it as a book that I don't particularly like.
You just don't like Jane Wilkinson because you
I do not at all.
By what a smart lady she really is.
No. And I don't believe it at all. I don't buy that argument at all. We can argue. We argued about it before, and I still do not for 1 second believe that she's actually smart.
All right, let's move on. We'll overlap Why Didn't They Ask Evans and talk about it in context of our bottom 5, because there's one here that is super out of whack, and that's what we need to discuss. So let's just get to our bottom 5 here. In last place, The Secret of Chimneys. In second to last place, The Big Four. In third to last place, The Seven Dials Mystery. In fourth to last place, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And in fifth to last place, Why Didn't They Ask Evans? There is one thing not right within that group.
You know what? There are probably 2 things that aren't right. The Big Four is the worst book that she possibly wrote, and so
I don't know about that. I don't know. You know what? I know that readability, like you just said, I'm now making the argument that you did when you said that you liked The Secret Adversary. I know. Then you said you liked The Secret Adversary more. The Secret of Chimneys was just, though, such a nightmare for us to read. Speaking about rereading, although I quite honestly have no memory of reading it in the first place, so who even knows? But that book was just scarring.
It's bad. Yeah.
So The Big Four was much easier to get through, even though it's terrible. They're both terrible.
It's terrible.
And they're off by 1 point. I mean, The Secret Chimneys is a 16, The Big Four is a 17.
I would swap them because I think The Big Four is so stupid that I think it's unforgivable. The problems with The Secret of Chimneys, of which there are many, to me are more forgivable than the issues.
Well, you know what's insane? You know what I would support, actually? Because that's a new there one category in the Big Four that's insane. What were we thinking giving detective characterization an 8 in the Big Four?
Well, Poirot and Hastings.
Poirot shoots a dart out of his mouth with a cigarette.
It's kind of awesome.
I mean, I would be okay taking that down to a 7 and having them tie for last place.
Yeah, we could do that.
Let's do that. That feels right. There's nothing within the Big Four that should be getting an 8 out of 10. That's insane. That's insane. Seven Dials Mystery is also pretty terrible. The sequel to The Secret of Chimney is a sequel of sorts. I don't think we need to talk about it that much. I certainly don't want to. Same thing with Why Didn't They Ask Evans, which we already talked about just last week. But The Mysterious Affair of Styles, it's insane that it is this low. And this is, of course, the first one we did. And I think we just didn't have anything to compare it to. So we were a little low, especially in plot credibility. We gave it a 4, yes, there are major issues in that novel, because this is the one that we always make fun of, where Alfred Inglethorpe put the incriminating letter onto the mantelpiece instead of stuffing it in his pocket or any other receptacle, either on his body or his person.
It or something. There's also a lot of costume wearing in it.
But the costume, I mean, that's Christie, though. I mean, Christie loves a costume. She loves an actor, amateur or professional.
It's true, but it's it struck us as so bad going through it. I think
plot credibility should at least get ticked up to a 5.
That's fine.
Yeah, let's tick it up 1 point. And then what I think we also weren't fair on, actually, is one-off characters. I think we were, and this is going to sound like a Christie burn, but I don't mean it this way, but I think given that this was the first Christie that we read closely within this project, I think that we were struck by, I mean, and we said at the beginning of this that we were always going to be honest about what Christie does well and what she doesn't do well, and that P.D. James' critique about cardboard characters who are essentially just playing cards shuffled in a deck, sometimes it's true, and it felt very true when we were reading this book, but now that we have the other books to compare it to, I actually don't think it's as egregious as it felt with no context. And that sounds like I'm basically saying, oh, we didn't realize how bad Christie is at character until we got into her books, but I think she has a weird way of developing character that takes some getting used to, and I just think we were unnecessarily harsh in that first book.
Yeah, you know what, I completely agree with you. The thing is, it's not universally true, because to go back to something like, again, Peril at End House, I mean, I think the characters
quite well done. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Murder on the Orient Express, really well even. Like Murder on the Orient Express, they're well drawn. The fact that The Mysterious Affair of Styles has a 2 out of 10 for one-off characters and the Seven Dials Mystery has a 6 is absurd. That's absurd.
Well, Seven Dials Mystery has Bundle, and Bundle kind of works it.
I loathe Bundle.
I know, you hate Bundle way more than I do.
But you know what? A character has to exist to be loathed, so I'm making your argument for you. But certainly, I think a 5. I think a 5 out of 10, right? Which ticks it up quite a bit, and takes it up ahead of The Mystery of the Blue Train, which feels right to me.
Feels super important, given that's the one with the ghost.
Yeah, given that that's the one with the ghost. So we have our new ranking order here. There's just one more bit of tweaking that we want to do, which is that as things stand,
we don't like Murder on the Links.
We don't like Murder on the Links. And I think, and that's another thing that, Murder on the Links was quite early on. That's the third book that we read. And I think it is very clear to us now, 11 books later, how little of an impression that book made on us as opposed to other Christie novels. So it's blandness.
We literally never bring it up. I mean, we make fun of, we
pretty much bring everything else up either in a derisive or complimentary way. And that one we just don't think about. And that's the one where Hastings found his wife, Cinderella.
Indeed. And that's how little we care about it.
I think that a 5 out of 10 for setting and tone is too high. I think that actually deserves a 3. I think we were like, sure. Oh, it was set in France. And it feels like France. Like that. No, that's a 3. And then I also think the plot credibility, I don't know why that got a 7 out of 10, but I kind of feel like that should be at least 1 point lower. It wasn't bad. I mean, people acted like people. It was fine, but it wasn't in any way exemplary. So let's take that one down as well. So what that essentially does then is to put Murder on the Links just below the Mysterious Affair Styles. And we will post this, I'm kind of posting a before and after of the table so you can see what we've done. But our new and I think very much improved rankings list is as follows. I'm just going to go through the titles, and if you care, dear listener, to look at the number values, the new number values assigned, please do so. So in last place, we have a tie. The Secret of Chimneys and the Big Four, tied for last. Then the Seven Dials mystery, one of our Christie thrillers. Why Didn't They Ask Evans? Yet another thriller. Then The Mystery of the Blue Train, not a favorite of ours or Dame Agatha's. Then Murder on the Links, a Poirot, but not a great one. The Mysterious Affair at Styles, our first Poirot, followed by The Secret Adversary, first Tommy and Tuppence, quite delightful, followed by The Man in the Brown Suit, what we would call our favorite thriller. Although, actually, now that I look at it, The Secret Adversary and The Man in the Brown Suit are tied. So, which of those would you give the edge, Catherine?
Probably you have to give it to Secret Adversary solely for Tommy and Tuppence. I mean, my preference is still for The Man in the Brown Suit.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, actually. So revising that, The Man in the Brown Suit followed by The Secret Adversary, which kind of wins the crown as best of the thrillers for now, given that it's technically a Tommy and Tuppence. We have more thrillers in our future, but I think not for quite a while. I hope not for quite a while.
One can hope.
One can hope. That brings us into our top 5. Lord Edgware Dies. That's followed by The Murder at the Vicarage, then Peril at End House, then Murder on the Orient Express, and in top place, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I feel really good about it, too. And, I mean, the thing that I would say about it is that the most delightful of the reads of those, to me, was Murder at the Vicarage. And the one that I think is the best is still Peril at End House. And I know that sounds like sacrilege, but a lot of the things that we talked about for Murder on the Orient Express and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, I think it leads us into our next point of conversation, which is the issue of rereading.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I think that I kind of agree with you. And there's been a real tension in this project that we've been doing, which is that we are really trying to rank these novels and discuss these novels as reads and not rereads. Right. But we obviously, as Christie fans, are rereading them. And it was very interesting how tough it was to reread Murder on the Orient Express and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, because once you know the big twist, it just deflates the read, which is why Murder at the Vicarage and Peril at End House were so much more just delightful to read. That said, I'm still glad that we ranked them higher.
Murder at the Vicarage, Murder at the Vicarage also has a really delightful narrator.
Mm-hmm. But so does The Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
It does, except, if you know who your narrator is in that case.
Right. Yeah, no, it just makes it hard. So, yeah, I mean, just segueing into that, the rereading of these books, the thing that I discovered and never expected in doing this project is that Christie fans often talk about this too, or just mystery novel fans talk about that sinking feeling you get when you're reading a book and you don't think that you've read it, but then something clicks and you're like, oh no, I read this one. And you might not even remember who done it, but the fact that you read it already just kind of makes you think, oh, I probably shouldn't read this, or I should try to find another one. We obviously went into this knowing that was going to happen, so it's not that we ever felt a sinking feeling about it, but I was very surprised by what often triggered my memory in terms of, oh, right, I definitely did read this book before.
Right, so our dear listeners don't know this necessarily, but we presented at Cambridge in June. We talked about a bunch of things, but the book that was our primary focus was Five Little Pigs, otherwise known as Murder in Retrospect. Mm-hmm. And it's one of my favorites. Kemper does not agree with this.
I do not. We'll get there in like 8 years.
Yeah, we'll get there in about 75 years from now. We will get to it. But the thing that triggered him was so fascinating to me, and I feel like, Kemper, you should talk about because I don't think it gives anything away. You should talk about the moment for you where you recognize that you had read the book before.
Yeah, so it's interesting, too, because it didn't happen until well past halfway through the book.
Right.
I actually,
yes.
and so Five Little Pigs is a Poirot novel, and I was pretty sure going into it that I had definitely read every single Poirot novel of Christie's, because as one just does. And that's why when I read some of these thrillers, I think there might be one or two of them that I actually didn't read before, but that to me is not as surprising because they're the thrillers and they're just not, you know, as central to the Christie as the Poirots and the Marples. So I was like, wow, I think this is a Poirot I've never read. This is crazy. And I even though I didn't ultimately love the book as much as Catherine does, I enjoyed the fact that I seemed to be reading a Poirot I had never read, and I got more than halfway through. And there are a number of people who Poirot interviews over and over again, the same people in this book. It's an interestingly structured book. And one of them is this woman who acted as a governess among the cast of characters when the murder took place. And Poirot goes to her home where she lives now as a bit of an older woman.
And it's kind of like a dumpy flat.
It's kind of in a dumpy flat, but when he is observing her living space, he sees these prints on the wall that are... It's not like they're of the equivalent of like a Van Gogh or anything like that. They're not super expensive, but they have taste and they have quality, and they're the kind of prints that only someone who appreciates art and who is thoughtful about what goes on their walls would have put there. And he realizes that this woman, even though she doesn't have a lot and she worked very hard and got very little monetarily for her work, she stored enough away that, you know, she is relatively comfortable in a frugal sort of a way and able to, in modern day parlance, she does her. And she's able to do that. And just the observation of the prints and just of her living space in general and what he gleaned from that about her character, it's this it's well written.
It's very well written. It's a very specific.
It's very specific in a specific moment. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I've read this, because I remembered that passage because it was such a key and beautifully drawn character moment where I was like, I remember this woman. I remembered nothing else from this entire book. I finished the book because we presented on it. The mystery is there. It's a fantastic mystery. I remembered nothing of that mystery. What I remembered was Agatha Christie's evocation of this woman in her dumpy little flat later in life. And that's happened in other places too. I think I mentioned, you know, there was like a little turn of phrase about the way Mary Debenham is described in Murder on the Orient Express. Obviously, I know that I read Murder on the Orient Express, but there are often these little moments in Christie that I remember that actually don't have anything to do with the mystery, and I never would have expected that. And I think a lot of people would be really surprised to hear that, especially those who discount Christie as a writer.
Stylist.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool. I love it.
I really like that as a story, not because you don't like Five Little Pigs, given that it's one of my favorites, but I really like it as a story because I think that it really points to something that goes completely overlooked. And I'm somebody who likes to pull things apart, clearly. I'm co-hosting this podcast. But I think that when you find something like that you can't pull apart, something like that is a poignant detail, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. I entered this project with a little bit of trepidation because it's hard not to judge Christie the way so many do, that, oh, this is someone that you read when you're 10 years old. And someone who's not a good writer and who's merely just a plot conjurer. And I have zero regrets about what we're doing because the more closely that you read her books, the more you get out of them.
Absolutely. I think that a year ago, when we had first proposed this ludicrous plan, which has eaten up 1 million hours of our time, which has brought us to England, you know,
and introduced us to so many lovely people.
So many lovely people. But, you know, one of the other things that I had been thinking about doing as a project was a literary project that was basically books you read in 5th grade. Because I thought it was really meaningful. That is where you develop how you read critically. I think that the books you read then probably matter the most to you, ultimately. Mm-hmm. Like, even if you don't realize it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
they shape you as a reader for the rest of your life.
For the rest of your life. And so the thing about talking about Agatha Christie is that rereading it, there is a remembrance there where it is about how you think through structure and how you actually, I think, parse information. Mm-hmm. And in a really weird way, I think it probably extends even past the books because this is one of the things that we do. We structurally, obviously we talk about the clues and etc. and break down the books. But I think that as a reader, having to work through those impulses, it makes you a better reader.
Oh, yeah. So much of the genius, I think, I've learned so much of the genius of what she does is that she's playing with assumption. So we are trained as not only readers, but just people who go through the world to make certain assumptions about information that we're given. And she loves undercutting it, just taking the rug right out from under you and saying, nope, you think X means Y, but X actually means Z. Or you shouldn't even be looking at X. You should have been looking at T, like whatever. And that is
well, I mean, until you realize that it's always the actor.
Exactly. And she has things that she goes back to again and again, given the volume also of what she's writing. Of course, there's going to be repetition there, and that's interesting to observe as well. But that exercise is a really meaningful exercise.
It's about critical thinking. How do you look at a situation, observe all the elements in it, and put the pieces together? Mm-hmm. And there are moving parts in every situation that you are ever going to be in, right?
Mm-hmm. It's about questioning, though. The idea that it's about questioning assumptions is a really valuable lesson. The entertainment value of the books is so high that quite valuable lesson is often ignored, even though it does come through.
I think that our two favorite characters, I think Monsieur Poirot would say that what you have to do is you have to sit down in your armchair in your living room and use your little gray cells. And I think that Miss Marple would probably say, think back through everybody you have ever met and keep those people in the back of your mind because situations repeat themselves. And I think that those are valuable lessons to take away. It's not to say that we're suggesting by any means that these are instructive novels.
Right.
But I think that you can take something away from how you read them that I think is really something that really formed me as a reader, and I'm sure you too.
Yeah, and I think that some would argue, well, you could say that about any mystery novelist, but I think there's something specific about Christie and playing with assumption. I think that she relies on that trope quite heavily, and more so than most other mystery novelists, certainly modern mystery novelists, but even Golden Age mystery novelists. And the disconnect or like the shock that you get when you feel that rug ripped out from under you and you realize, oh, I've been looking at this totally the wrong way. I mean, that's the power both of the entertainment but also of that lesson. And that's what she does well.
And, I think that there's a lot of criticism directed at Agatha Christie, that they're puzzle mysteries and that they don't have a lot of depth, but it's really interesting, especially as a young reader, to think about it, because if you look at something like P.D. James or Colin Dexter, I mean, I was a huge Inspector Morse fan. Even P.D. James, who was incredibly masterful at plotting, and you can argue easily that she was a much better stylist. You can also argue that the books have more depth. But, I don't think that those books taught me to be a reader.
Right.
I think it was the Christie books.
Right. I don't think anyone teaches to observe critically and to read critically, ultimately, yes, to read critically as effectively as Christie. I think that is a totally fair statement. just some thoughts, and obviously we will have more thoughts, and that's what we do on this podcast. We just wanted to take a moment, take a breath, appreciate the fact that we've been doing this for a year, just think about that a little bit and talk about it. And we'll be back next week with some more regularly scheduled programming. Catherine, would you like to share what our next adventure is?
Yes, we're going to be doing some Partners in Crime.
Partners in Crime, who is that?
So it's Tommy and
Tommy and
Tuppence.
Tuppence making a reappearance. So exciting. After all of our super adversary love on this episode, it's perfect.
Our old friends. There are two stories which we're going to talk about, but they're kind of preface. So it will be the Affair of the Pink Pearl will be the actual episode next week.
Right, and just to be clear, so Partners in Crime is a short story collection.
A collection.
Of Tommy and Tuppence mysteries, which Christie wrote fairly early on, and the first two short stories, a little confusingly, are not really mysteries.
Aren't really...
Yeah, they're not standalone mysteries. They basically set up the rest of the mysteries within the collection, even though they're chapters that have their own titles, so they seem like they're going to be mysteries, but they're not. Yeah, so Tommy and Tuppence next week, we're very excited. There are adaptations for those as well, just as a heads up. We'll talk more about that when we cover our first story. And in the meantime, we mentioned that the table of rankings will be at our various social media sites, so let's review what those are. First off, though, of course, you can always email us at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. On Twitter, we are at allaboutthedame. On Facebook, our Facebook page is All About Agatha, and on Instagram, we are at All About Agatha. Catherine, you can also find on Twitter at Brobcat, and we really look forward to another year, many more years of this podcast as we work our way through the next 14 and the next 14 and the next 14 and the next 14, and at some point that'll get us to 66, but that's far in the future. So until then, we will see you next time.
And we thank you all for listening because we appreciate you guys so much.
Bye.
Bye.